What if everything you've been told about spiritual awakening is a lie? They told you it was about peace, about raising your vibration, visualizing your best life, and bathing in positive energy until everything just aligned. But that's not awakening. That's escapism dressed in spiritual drag. Real awakening doesn't coddle your ego. It tears it to pieces. It doesn't wrap you in white light. It drops you into the fire. This isn't about mantras, mala beads, or manifesting a soulmate. This is about something raw, something ancient, something that will break you open from the inside out. Kundalini is not some mystical accessory for your spiritual brand. It's the unfiltered intelligence of life itself, rising through your spine with zero regard for your comfort. Most people don't want truth. They want a prettier illusion. But if you're here, you might be one of the few ready to burn through the lies and meet what awakening really demands. Kundalini is not a concept. It's not a trend. It's not something you read about in a book and then decide to try over the weekend. It is a raw, biological, spiritual, and existential force that doesn't ask for permission and doesn't care whether or not you're ready. When it moves, it moves. And when it hits, your life as you knew it is over. People love the idea of awakening, but they hate what it actually requires. They want bliss without the breakdown, clarity without the confusion, freedom without facing everything inside them that's been buried, avoided, or denied. That's why most spirituality today is a polished performance. It's curated, convenient, and completely divorced from the real process of transformation. Real Kundalini doesn't care about your image. It doesn't care about your spiritual lingo. It's not here to help you feel enlightened. It's here to strip away the illusion that there's anything to seek. For centuries, Kundalini was held sacred and secret, not because it was elitist, but because it was dangerous when misunderstood. Not dangerous like scary, but dangerous like radioactive. It's energy. Pure, intelligent, creative life force that, once awakened, starts rewiring you from the inside. Nervous system, brain, emotions, identity. It tears through the unconscious with surgical precision, unearthing trauma, patterns, beliefs, and behaviors you didn't even know you were carrying. And it doesn't do this in a way that feels poetic or peaceful. It does it in a way that feels like you're dying. And in a sense, you are. Because what's being killed off is everything that isn't real. The roles, the masks, the strategies that got you approval but cost you your authenticity. That's why people panic when it starts. Because Kundalini doesn't just show you the truth, it makes you feel it. And most of us have built entire lives to avoid that kind of intensity. The New Age movement has done a brilliant job at neutering this force, watering it down into safe little meditations and chakra diagrams with rainbow graphics. It's been romanticized, commodified, and packaged into something you can post about without ever touching its reality. But real Kundalini is messy. It's violent, chaotic, ecstatic, sacred, and non-linear. It defies logic and schedules, and when it begins to rise, it doesn't give a damn about your plans. There are things I wish I could say here, but YouTube isn't the place for all of it. That's why we created the free Insights Academy newsletter. Sign up through the link below and you'll not only get deeper, unfiltered knowledge, but for a limited time, you'll also receive a free digital copy of The Kybalion. This energy doesn't play by your rules. It has its own intelligence, its own timing, and its own agenda. It's not here to flatter your ego, it's here to break it. Because only through the death of the false self can the real self emerge. And the people who experience this don't talk about it casually. They don't turn it into a brand. They often don't talk about it at all. Because once you've been touched by something this real, the only thing left is silence or truth. Kundalini isn't for those who want to dabble. It's for those ready to burn. Not everyone will understand this. Most will dismiss it. But if this force has begun to move in you, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not a metaphor. It's not a belief system. It's a fire. And once it's lit, it doesn't go out. It only moves forward, tearing through illusion after illusion, until nothing is left but what's real. No one truly chooses Kundalini. Not in the way people think. You don't light a candle, sit in lotus position, chant a few Sanskrit syllables, and summon it like some spiritual pet. Real awakening doesn't arrive on your terms. It's not neat. It doesn't knock gently. It crashes through you like a storm, violent, unapologetic, and irreversible. And when it comes, it doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait for you to get your life in order. It breaks you open in the middle of your job, your marriage, your routine. It flips the table while you're still setting it. And if you've ever felt it, even once, you know what I mean. It's like being hijacked by something ancient that speaks in sensations, not words. It drags the truth out of your bones and makes you see things you've spent your whole life avoiding. The irony is that most people spend years seeking awakening, chasing it, trying to induce it through meditation, breathwork, plant medicine, or long retreats in the jungle. And then, when it actually begins, when something deep inside them cracks open, they panic. They run. Because it doesn't feel like the bliss they were promised. It feels like they're being dismantled from the inside out. And they are. That's the real beginning. Not of some magical state of enlightenment, but of a total breakdown of the identity you once clung to for safety. You might find yourself crying without knowing why, shaking at night, having vivid dreams, memories, or flashes of something you can't explain. Your body might burn with heat or twitch involuntarily. You may lose your appetite, your sleep, your interest in everything you used to care about. People around you might think you're losing it. Hell, you might think you're losing it. But what's actually happening is that you're waking up. And waking up isn't gentle, it's violent in its honesty. Everything that's been repressed starts to rise. Childhood trauma, generational wounds, stored emotional pain. The body remembers what the mind has tried to forget, and Kundalini doesn't ask for permission to bring it to the surface. It just does. Because that's what healing really is. Not a pretty quote on a pastel background, but a full-on confrontation with the parts of you you've buried alive. You'll try to explain it, at first. Maybe to your partner, your friends, maybe even your therapist. But they'll look at you like you've lost it, because unless someone has experienced this directly, they can't understand it. And that isolation becomes part of the initiation. You learn to stop explaining and start listening to your body, your intuition, your truth. You stop performing spirituality and start living it. Quietly, alone, often, not because you want to be alone, but because there's no other way through this path. It's yours, and no one can walk it for you. The worst part? There's no map, no textbook, no spiritual guru who can make it make sense. The path is as unique as your fingerprint. What burns one person will purify another. What feels like madness to you might actually be the intelligence of life rearranging your nervous system so you can finally feel something real. You're not broken. You're not sick. You're not failing. You're waking up, and everything in your system, mind, body, soul, is trying to catch up. And yet, as terrifying as it is, there's a strange beauty to it. A holy kind of destruction. Because in the rubble of everything you thought you were, something else begins to emerge. Not a new persona, not a polished, perfected version of your old self, but something raw, something true, something that can't be captured in words or explained in a caption, something that doesn't care about followers, titles, or spiritual status. It just is. That's the real beginning. Not when the light comes, but when everything goes dark. Not when you feel peace, but when you feel everything. Because only when the false self dies can the real one even begin to breathe. There's a reason the modern spiritual world is booming, and it has very little to do with truth. It's because people are desperate for relief. Not transformation, not awakening, just relief. Relief from anxiety, from confusion, from the hollow ache that keeps showing up no matter how perfect life looks from the outside. And the system figured that out. So now we've got spiritual influencers, chakra candles, crystal water bottles, and manifestation journals being marketed like miracle fixes for existential pain. But here's the part they don't tell you. None of that will save you, because none of that is real awakening. It's a costume, a performance, and often it's a distraction. This is what's known as spiritual bypassing. It's when you use spiritual ideas and practices to avoid facing the raw, messy truth of your own inner world. It's when someone says, "Just raise your vibration," while ignoring deep emotional wounds that have never been addressed. Or when people throw around words like surrender or alignment, while secretly doing everything they can to control how they're perceived. It's when healing becomes a brand and enlightenment becomes an aesthetic. But real growth has nothing to do with looking spiritual. It has everything to do with being brutally honest, with yourself first, and then with the world. The truth is, awakening will not elevate your self-image. It will destroy it. It's not about becoming more of what you think you are. It's about unlearning everything that you were conditioned to believe. And that process is ugly. It's inconvenient. It doesn't look good on Instagram. And it sure as hell doesn't sell many online courses. Because real spiritual work isn't attractive. It's intimate. It's lonely. It's shaking on the floor at 2 a.m. while everything you believed about yourself unravels. It's facing your shame, your anger, your childhood pain. Not just talking about it in safe circles, but actually feeling it in your bones and letting it move through you like a storm. Bypassing offers the illusion of control. It lets you stay comfortable while pretending you're evolving. But nothing real grows in comfort. Growth happens at the edges, where your ego starts to dissolve and the false narratives begin to collapse. And the problem is, the bypass is everywhere. It's in the workshops that promise instant healing. It's in the influencers who use words like authenticity while selling perfectly filtered versions of their lives. It's in the way we spiritualize everything just to avoid sitting in the raw discomfort of simply being human. People think awakening is about adding more light, but it's actually about embracing the dark. Not the evil, not the sinister, but the uncomfortable, the unknown, the hidden, the parts of you you've disowned, the grief you swallowed when you were young, the rage you learned to suppress because it made others uncomfortable, the fear you masked with fake confidence. Kundalini doesn't bypass any of that. It drags it all up, and it does so unapologetically. That's why it's not for everyone. Because it won't let you stay in character. It forces you to drop the script, the language, the performance. It doesn't care about how spiritual you look. It only cares about how real you're willing to be. And the truth is, most people don't want the truth. They want the feeling of being spiritual without the consequences of transformation. They want the story of awakening without the sacrifice. But awakening doesn't care about your preferences. It's a fire. It either burns everything that's false, or it doesn't touch you at all. Eventually, you realize that the spiritual persona you've built to feel safe is just another version of your ego. A more socially acceptable one, maybe. But still, an ego. And when Kundalini starts to rise, it will tear that persona to shreds. Not to punish you, but to free you. To show you what's left when the mask falls off. That's the part most people never reach. Because that's the part where the real work begins. And it doesn't happen on stage. It happens in silence, in shadows, in the moments when no one's watching. The moment Kundalini begins to rise, you'll realize just how unequipped the world is to understand what's happening to you. You try to explain the physical sensations, the heat in your spine, the rushes of energy, the involuntary movements, and they call it anxiety. You speak about visions, emotional waves, a sudden flood of old memories, and they call it trauma response, psychosis, or dissociation. You feel like you're dying and being born at the same time, and the system only offers pills, labels, or blank stares. And maybe that's the most isolating part of this entire journey. The realization that the institutions you were raised to trust, medicine, psychology, education, have no framework for what you're experiencing. Not because you're broken, but because they were never designed to support transformation. They're built to keep you functional, not awakened. Their job is to return you to normal, even if normal is what made you sick in the first place. When you experience a true awakening, it doesn't fit inside diagnostic manuals. You're not mentally ill. You're going through a biological and spiritual initiation that modern society has forgotten how to recognize. Because in the West, altered states of consciousness are pathologized, not explored. Everything that doesn't fit the narrow definition of rationality is seen as a threat. But what if the threat isn't the awakening itself? What if it's the system that fears it? Kundalini doesn't destroy you. It destroys the false sense of safety you built in a world that teaches you to be small, predictable, obedient. It reveals how numb you've become to your own body, how long you've lived outside yourself. And when it starts to awaken, it's not just energy, it's memory. Emotional memory stored in muscle, tissue, breath. This is where trauma and Kundalini intersect. Both live in the body, both rise through sensation, and both refuse to be ignored. People often mistake awakening symptoms for breakdowns. That's because society has only ever taught us how to suppress, never how to integrate. So when the body finally starts to release what's been trapped for years, we panic, we label it. We try to medicate it away. But the truth is, you can't numb your way through awakening. You either go into it consciously, or it takes you there by force. And that's where the danger lies, not in the energy itself, but in the lack of understanding. When someone has a spontaneous Kundalini awakening with no context, no support, and no language for what's happening, it can feel terrifying. They might think they're going crazy. Their friends and family might reinforce that belief. And so, many suppress it, bury it, push it back down, and in doing so, cut themselves off from the most powerful inner transformation they've ever been offered. You can't turn it off, but you can numb it. And numbing it doesn't make it disappear. It just delays the inevitable. That's why this process demands education, not sedation. It requires space. It requires humility. And most of all, it requires the courage to step outside the system's approval. To say, this is real. I don't need it to be understood. I just need to face it. Because once you realize the system wasn't built to understand you, you stop trying to make sense within its rules. You start learning to trust yourself again. You begin to understand that this awakening isn't a detour. It's the return. Not to who the world told you to be, but to who you actually are underneath all the programming. And once you taste even a fragment of that truth, there's no going back. The modern world loves to pretend there's a hard line between science and spirituality, that what can't be measured doesn't exist, that awakening is either religious, delusion, or poetic metaphor. But when Kundalini rises, none of those arguments hold, because what you feel isn't abstract, it's physiological. Something happens in your body, something real. And more, science is starting to catch up. Your nervous system is the bridge between the physical and the energetic. When Kundalini activates, it doesn't bypass the body, it moves through it. The spine becomes a conduit. The brain rewires. The vagus nerve lights up like circuitry rediscovering itself. This isn't symbolic, it's somatic. Measurable shifts occur in brainwave states, hormonal patterns, and electromagnetic fields. The same practices that ancient yogis used to describe thousands of years ago, breath, stillness, internal energy, are now being studied in labs for their effects on neuroplasticity, trauma recovery, and altered states of consciousness. And yet, we still live in a culture that rolls its eyes at the mystical while running billion-dollar industries around stress relief. We want the benefits of calm without understanding the mechanisms that produce it. But Kundalini doesn't offer calm. It offers clarity, and clarity doesn't always feel good. It feels like your brain being torn from the grip of everything familiar, everything predictable, everything safe. One of the first things people report when Kundalini starts to rise is a radical sensitivity to sound, to light, to other people's energy. The world suddenly feels louder, more intense. Your usual habits, scrolling, small talk, surface-level distraction, start to feel unbearable. That's not you becoming unstable. That's your nervous system becoming honest. You're no longer dissociating from your environment. You're feeling it in full spectrum. That alone is enough to make anyone question their sanity. But it's also the beginning of a new form of intelligence, one that doesn't come from logic, but from awareness. In Western psychology, we speak about trauma like it's an emotional thing, but trauma is physiological. It lives in the body as tension, contraction, bracing, and awakening, particularly Kundalini awakening, is the release valve. The tremors, the heat, the spontaneous movements, the emotional floods, these aren't dysfunctions. They're the body finally letting go of what it was never meant to hold in the first place. This is why so many people who undergo deep awakening also experience spontaneous healing, not because of magic, but because the body was always designed to heal once it felt safe enough to release. That's the irony. The same symptoms that look like a breakdown through the lens of conventional thinking are, through a deeper lens, signs of realignment. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. The chaos is part of the reset. The nervous system, for perhaps the first time in your life, is shedding the tension it's held since childhood. And it doesn't do that gently. It does it with force, with intelligence, with ruthless compassion. Even brain imaging is beginning to reflect this. People in deep meditative or awakening states show changes in the default mode network, the part of the brain tied to self-referencing and ego. As it quiets, a sense of self begins to dissolve. That's not philosophy, that's neuroscience. And it's exactly what ancient mystics described centuries ago. Ego death, union with the divine, the collapse of separation. The science doesn't replace the mystery. It just confirms that the mystery was never separate from the body to begin with. Kundalini is not superstition. It's not a spiritual fantasy. It's the forgotten language of human potential, the part of us that modern culture has numbed, shamed, or pathologized. And when it awakens, it doesn't make you more spiritual. It makes you more alive. Not just in your thoughts, but in your cells. Not just in your beliefs, but in your breath. It roots you so deeply into your body that you begin to realize spirituality was never meant to lift you out of the world. It was meant to bring you fully into it. There comes a moment on the path, if you're lucky or cursed, depending on how you see it, when the search stops. Not because you found what you were looking for, but because the one who was searching no longer exists. It sounds poetic, but when it happens, it's not beautiful, it's brutal, because the seeker dies. And all the meaning you once pulled from books, teachers, gurus, ceremonies, it slips through your fingers like sand. Not because it was worthless, but because it was never going to save you. Kundalini doesn't care how long you've meditated, how many retreats you've been to, or what lineage you've studied under. When it rises, it wipes the slate clean. All the spiritual decorations fall away, and what's left is you, naked, exposed, unarmed. There is no technique that can hold you, no mantra that can soften it. The only way through is through. And what's even more disorienting is that everything you thought you were becoming, everything you hoped awakening would make you, falls apart too. The seeker identity is seductive. It gives you a role, a tribe, a direction. It says, I'm on a journey, and that makes you feel safe, like you're progressing, like you're building something. But the truth is, the longer you identify as a seeker, the further you are from what's real. Because real awakening doesn't give you something. It takes everything away. Every goal, every image, every spiritual ambition. It leaves you with nothing to chase. Because suddenly, you realize there's nothing outside of you worth chasing. The answers you were so desperate to find, they were only relevant to the version of you that no longer exists. And here's the paradox that tears people apart. When the seeking ends, there's no celebration, no enlightenment badge, no final step, just silence, stillness, a void that most people find terrifying. Because in that void, you meet yourself. Not the self you crafted through years of effort, but the self that's been quietly watching all along. And for the first time, you see that it was never about adding anything to your life. It was about subtracting everything that wasn't real. This is why many people experience a kind of spiritual depression after awakening. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because the scaffolding of their identity has collapsed and there's nothing rushing in to replace it. You stop being excited by teachings. You stop looking for guidance. You stop needing validation. The silence is deafening at first. But in that silence, something else begins to move. Something deeper than words, deeper than thought. Presence. Not the concept, but the experience. Not the idea of being, but the actual reality of it. There are no fireworks in this phase, no grand revelations, just the hum of existence, just breath, just aliveness. And while that might sound uneventful, it's the most profound thing a human being can experience, because it's real, not hyped up, not dressed in ceremony, just the naked, beating truth of now. Eventually, you realize something else. You were never separate to begin with. The seeking was only necessary because you believed you were lost. And that belief, more than anything else, kept you searching in circles. But now, there's no more seeking, no more chasing the next high, no more waiting for some cosmic download to give your life meaning. You don't need meaning. You are meaning. And it doesn't need to be explained. That's the real end of the path. Not when you become someone else, but when you finally drop into what you've always been. Still, empty, alive, awake. And the funny part? No one around you might even notice. You'll still do the dishes, still answer emails, still walk the dog. But underneath it all, something has shifted permanently. You're not in the world the same way anymore. The veil is gone. The game is over, and you're just here. Spirituality can become the most seductive trap of all, not because it's fake, but because it feels so close to the truth. You start out with the best intentions, healing, growth, freedom, and somewhere along the line, it turns into a new kind of addiction, a new identity, a new performance. And the scariest part? You don't even realize it's happening, because it looks better than the addictions you used to have. You're not binge drinking or chasing status anymore. You're meditating, journaling, working on your inner child. But if you're honest, it's still a chase, still a way to avoid the present, still a way to avoid yourself. This is where many people get stuck, in the loop, the never-ending cycle of healing and self-improvement, always trying to fix something, always trying to become something. Because deep down, the idea that you are already whole terrifies you more than the idea that you're broken. If you're broken, you have something to do, somewhere to go, a project to work on. But if you're already whole, what then? Who are you without the struggle? Kundalini doesn't let you stay addicted to the process. It breaks the loop, not gently, not politely, but with force. It exposes every spiritual habit that's become a disguise. It reveals how even your search for higher consciousness was often just another way to avoid being fully present in your life. Another way to seek significance, superiority, or safety. It shows you how the spiritual self you've worked so hard to build is still a persona, just a more enlightened one. Eventually, you have to confront the uncomfortable truth, that your healing has become a performance, that your rituals have become routine, that your meditation practice is more about control than surrender. And when that truth hits, it stings. Because suddenly, the entire identity you've built, one you thought was rooted in truth, starts to feel hollow. Not because it was fake, but because it was never meant to be permanent. Real awakening doesn't ask you to become more spiritual. It asks you to become more real. And that means letting go of even the things that once saved you. The practices, the teachers, the communities, they served a purpose. But at some point, they become cages. Comfortable cages, maybe. Beautiful ones. But cages all the same. And freedom can't bloom in captivity, even spiritual captivity. So what's left when you step away from all of it? What remains when you're not chasing another course, another ceremony, another breakthrough? Just you, just life, just breath and stillness and raw, unfiltered awareness. And that might feel terrifying at first, because it's silent. There's no structure to lean on, no method to follow, just presence. And presence demands everything. It's not passive. It's active engagement with this moment, with what's actually here, not what you wish were here. You'll realize that most of your life was spent running. Even your healing was a form of escape. A socially acceptable one, yes, but still escape. And when Kundalini arrives, it closes the exits. It corners you into presence. It strips away the distraction of becoming and drops you into being. Not being someone, just being. No title, no identity, just existence. You'll find that what you were chasing in all those practices was never outside of you. It was always here, hidden behind the layers of trying, seeking, improving. And when all of that drops, when you finally stop chasing, something clicks. You return, not to some perfect version of yourself, but to the ordinary miracle of just being alive. This is where real liberation begins. Not in what you add, but in what you release. Not in transcendence, but in embodiment. Not in reaching for the stars, but in planting your feet fully on the ground and feeling the electricity of this moment. No story, no mask, no escape. Just the truth, raw, terrifying, and beautiful. There's a moment on the awakening path when the noise stops, not because the world has changed, but because you no longer belong to it in the same way. You can't explain it. There's no clean way to say, I'm not who I was, and I don't know who I'm becoming. So you go quiet, not out of fear, but because the language of your old life no longer fits the truth you're beginning to embody. And in that silence, something breaks, not you, but the illusion that you ever needed permission to be what you are. Kundalini has a strange way of rearranging your world. It doesn't just shake up your inner life, it reshapes everything around you. People start to fade out. Conversations that once excited you become hollow. Relationships fracture, not from conflict, but from incompatibility. The vibration you once lived in starts to shift, and not everyone can, or wants to, shift with you. You'll try to hold on at first. You'll reach back into old dynamics hoping for familiarity. But something in you already knows. You've outgrown the room. This loneliness isn't a mistake. It's not a punishment. It's part of the purification. Because when you awaken, you lose your tribe. Not because they're wrong or toxic, but because you're no longer playing the same game. The person you were is dissolving, and the new self emerging doesn't fit neatly into social expectations. You're not chasing approval. You're not performing belonging. You're just here, raw, unfiltered. And that makes people uncomfortable. You'll feel the pull to explain yourself, to convince others that what you're going through is real. But eventually you'll stop, because you'll see that explanation is just another attempt to be understood by people who were never meant to walk this path with you. This is the stretch of the path where no one can come with you. Not your partner, not your friends, not your teacher. It's you and the fire. That's it. But here's the thing. This isn't isolation. It's initiation. It's the stripping away of everything that was never truly yours. It's the severing of codependency disguised as connection. And as painful as it is, it's sacred. Because only in that solitude can the real voice inside you begin to speak. Not the voice that repeats affirmations, but the one that knows. The one that's been waiting, silently, for you to stop looking outward and finally listen. You may grieve, not just for people, but for versions of yourself you no longer recognize. For the life you thought you were building, for the dreams that now feel irrelevant. That grief is holy. Let it come. Let it break you. Let it cleanse the corners of your being that still cling to who you thought you had to be. Because only when all that is gone will you finally meet yourself. And in that meeting, you'll realize something staggering. You were never actually alone. What you were missing wasn't people. It was presence. Yours. Undiluted, unfiltered, unedited. The silence you feared becomes the space in which truth echoes. And in that space, you start to see the world differently, not as something to conquer or escape from, but something to move through with clarity and compassion. The path doesn't get easier, but it gets clearer. You stop needing to be seen because you start seeing yourself. And eventually, the solitude that once felt like exile becomes sanctuary. not because it's quiet, but because it's true. And once you've tasted truth, real truth, you'll never settle for performance again. There's a point when the fire stops feeling like destruction and starts feeling like truth. Not because it gets easier, but because you no longer resist what it's doing to you. You stop flinching. You stop bargaining. You stop asking when it will end. Because you realize it's not here to end anything. It's here to bring you home, to burn through the illusion, the performance, the projection, until all that's left is what's real. Not what's ideal, not what's spiritual, just what's real. Kundalini doesn't awaken you to become someone special. It awakens you so you can stop pretending to be anything at all. It rips off the masks, not to humiliate you, but to free you. All the ideas you had about yourself, how you should act, how you should heal, how you should show up, they were never yours. They were adaptations, survival strategies, echoes of who the world told you to be. And when that energy rises, it doesn't ask for permission to dismantle them. It just moves. Through the spine, through the heart, through every lie you've ever mistaken for identity. You'll try to rebuild. At first, it's natural. You'll want to turn what you're going through into something solid. A new identity, a better story, a wiser version of the self. But even that, eventually, will burn. Because real awakening doesn't give you something to hold. It teaches you how to stand in the space where nothing needs to be held. And in that space, you begin to understand what freedom actually means. Not comfort, not bliss, just the ability to be present in your own skin without running, without hiding, without needing to fix or improve or earn anything. People talk about being reborn like it's a cinematic experience, but rebirth isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's subtle, quiet. It looks like being able to sit with yourself in complete stillness and feel no need to fill the silence. It looks like not needing answers, like not needing to be understood, like finding peace in the middle of the storm, not by escaping it, but by becoming part of it. That's the fire. That's the medicine. That's the gift. You stop searching for signs. You stop waiting for the next breakthrough, because you realize that the path was never about becoming anything. It was about remembering what you've always been. Not the version of you shaped by conditioning, but the one that existed before language, before identity, before the world told you who to be. And when you touch that space, everything changes. Not because your life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you finally see it for what it is. Raw, messy, sacred, alive. This is what the modern spiritual world doesn't prepare you for, because they can't package it. They can't sell it. They can't turn it into a 3-step course or a morning routine. This kind of awakening can't be branded. It can't be monetized. And that's why it's so rare. Because the moment you stop needing anything from your awakening, it begins to give you everything you actually need. And here's the thing most people miss. There's no going back. Once Kundalini opens your eyes, you can't unsee. You can't pretend. You can't shrink back into the old life, the old roles, the old safety nets. They'll feel foreign, like clothes that no longer fit, because they don't. You've outgrown the version of yourself that needed them. Now you walk differently, speak differently, see differently. Not because you're trying, but because you've become aligned with what was always underneath the noise. And that's the true ending, and the true beginning. Not a destination, but a way of being. Not a badge to wear, but a way to walk. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to prove anything. You just live, fully, honestly, present in your body, awake in your soul. Not perfect, not finished, but real. And if you're still holding back, waiting for the right time to go deeper, this is it. Subscribe to the Insights Academy newsletter through the link below. We're sharing the truths that can't be spoken elsewhere. And you'll also receive a free digital copy of the Kybalion, because some wisdom is meant to find you when you're finally ready to hear it. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it,"